Ted set this up before lunch, but just as a bit of a reminder, when we've done these, so this is the second year we've done this, and we have kind of two groups that are invited. We have a group of communities. So last year we had 10 communities. This group we had 9 communities. And these are folks who are doing this work on the day-to-day basis, and we've got chamber representatives, and we've got elected officials, and we've got others who are doing this work on a daily basis. And then we've got others that we mistakenly called last year thought leaders, and a bunch of the thought leaders said, we don't like being called thought leaders. But these are folks who are also doing this work, but it's sometimes at a different level. And they're thinking about this work, and they're academics and they're organizations who are doing this on a regional level or a state level or a national level. And this conversation between the two groups is what we think is really important, an important piece of this, and we're kind of proud of it. What we want to do now is I have conned and cajoled a few of the individuals who are doing this work at the kind of 30,000 foot level or broadly or regionally to give us their thoughts, to give us some insight on what they think they've heard over the last couple days. And so I'm just going to call on some folks to come up and do that. And we're going to start with one of our academic leaders who's nearby. And I'm going to ask Chuck Shootman to come up and give us some thoughts.
Let's clap for you.
No applause needed. Thank you. Yes. Well, first let me begin by thanking all of you guys for carving time from your calendars to come share your experiences with us. I learned so much by being around you and listening to you and trying not to talk as much as I normally do. But thank you for making time to share your stories. And I think, Clark, throughout the course of the past couple of days, been some very impactful messages to me. And Clark helped start it yesterday by reminding me there are no silver bullets to solve the workforce development challenges, but there can be silver buckshot. And I think as I've listened over the day, that the meaningfulness of silver buckshot is impactful, because as Ted's initial graphic showed us of the asteroid shower, we're not seeking to address one issue or one big problem. We've got lots of moving parts as a part of this conversation. And therefore, it is imperative that we get better at not only dealing with complexity, but chewing gum and walking at the same time, doing multiple things in a coordinated way that lead us toward a shared outcome and a desirable result. Now, this morning I was reminded of the importance of communication in that, because once again, as anyone knows, if you don't care where you're going, any road will get you there. And in this case, there are a lot of people doing a lot of good work, but there aren't, in my communities, always a lot of shared understanding of what the problem we're trying to solve is and what a solution, what good looks like. And so I think it's important that we tell our stories. The bad news gets told regularly. You can watch it every night and listen to it. The work you're doing and in making progress in helping your communities address challenges don't always get shared. And we have a responsibility to be advocates for that good news. And it takes time to do that. Many of you have the power of convening. Use your influence to convene with a purpose and help develop a shared understanding of not only the current situation, but where it is your community would like to see the community go and the needs to be met. So I was encouraged this morning by the conversations around the importance of communication. And then again, I'll repeat, there were some immediate action steps that I feel obligated to take to help my community and to help the communities that we work with across our state. One is I'm reminded of the impactful and valuable significance of partnerships, and partnerships between employers and educators, and partnerships between employers and students, partnerships between employers and community leaders. I think that can help us in a lot of ways, bring new resources to bear that we need to help address problems. I think it also helps in sharing the messages of what is getting done and what's being accomplished, and pointing out the challenges of having competing demands placed on institutions that can't do everything in the same way with the same restricted resources at the same time. And our school systems are often, our K through 12 school systems, when you think about how often we change our graduation requirements, our instructional hours that we want addressed, how frequently that changes, and then we wake up 4 years later surprised that we're not getting the results we want. Well, hello, we moved the mark every 20 days. So I think those partnerships can be impactful there. And it reminds me that sometimes it's helpful to provide communities with guides and tools they can use to help forge those partnerships, to make that process simpler so we don't all have to reinvent a wheel. Secondly, along that same line, how many of you know the leading and impactful resources in your community that are involved in the workforce, in solving the workforce development challenges in your community? And where would you go to get that list? Who has the list? And it strikes me that in our state, we just had local elections in August, and about 40% of all the county officials in our state changed. We do that every 4 years. And so the institutional knowledge within your community of who's involved and who needs to be involved sometimes erodes and changes. And those of us who have an opportunity to help assure that people do know where to go to get that information, I think we need to step up and be more active in sharing it. And then finally, and I will hush, there is a lot of innovation on the way. Some in process and approach and structure, some in technology and how we use technology to our benefit. And the part that is often lagging are our administrative and policy structures. What our rules and regs say we have to do. And so I see an opportunity, particularly in this space, to help look for innovations in structure that can better afford and enable the agility that local communities and businesses need to solve their problems. So Clark, those are some of the really, really good, for me, inputs and influences that you guys have made on me in the past couple of days.
Great. Thank you. So Chuck kind of ended there talking about at the policy level, and I think the next person I would invite to come up is a real policy wonk. We have, for the last couple years, we've invited Janet Topolsky to come from the Aspen Institute, and she hasn't been able to come, but this year she said, "Have I got somebody for you?" And she introduced herself. Catherine Ferguson has one of the most impressive resumes I've ever read, so you need to Google and look at her resumes, and she really is a policy wonk, and so I'm interested to hear what she's heard and what the Aspen folks are hearing in their own work and what they're thinking about and how it relates to the conversations we've had.
I now have to wow you, which is a high bar, but thank you for the kind introduction. And it's true that until the last year, my whole career has been in the public sector. I've predominantly worked at the federal level in both the Senate and then in the executive branch. And so this is really a privilege to listen to, and I really, my teachers through all of my time in the federal government have been practitioners on the ground, and the reason that I'm really attracted to and compelled to do work that's more focused on rural communities and small communities is because of the interface that you have with practitioners and people on the ground and the stories that you hear. That I just, when I've done work in urban areas and big cities, it's noisy and it's hard to figure out where the rubber meets the road. And with all of you, it's easy to tell. You're deep in community, you're in it, and sometimes it means it's hard for me to hear and hard for me to understand because you're so much in the middle of everything, and we all use our own language. But I really appreciate it, and for me to be at the Aspen Institute now, what I have is the chance to travel a lot and sit in a lot of rooms like this one and not like this one, and just listen and learn from people who are in the work. So thank you for that. A few things I might note. I actually have stayed pretty clear from policy, but would acknowledge that what I hear is a lot of things that bump up against policy quite quickly. And I think one of the things I've been asking myself and thinking about, just aware of the whole time I've been here, is who's in the room and who's not. I'm very aware that there aren't a whole lot of folks with local government or regional government, let alone federal government, who are in the room, but so many of the things that you're talking about have that intersection. And I'm always wondering what are the ways that local government, civic sector, private sector really need to all be holding hands to make progress. The other thing I would note from my perspective, there aren't a whole lot of workers in the room, and there aren't a whole lot of young people. We talk about workforce and development, but those aren't folks in the room. And so I trust that many of you are engaging workers and community members in very interactive ways and eliciting that response, but that's an observation that I made that I think we need to be cognizant of. The work you're doing, it's so obvious how it's broad. This has already been mentioned many times, but you're working with, if this is a inherently multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary issue that's hard to get your hands around. But one of the things I keep asking is, you are all the leaders in the field. You are all doing this work as gazelles. And I keep wondering what made you and what made your organizations work the way they do? How do we, if we wanted the room to be filled with 3 times the number of organizations doing innovative work all around the country, what would it take? How would a funder, how would a regional intermediary, how would an organization like ours lift up and give advice to organizations so that they could do what you're doing? That's something I keep asking, and anybody who wants to come and give me those suggestions or advice later, that'd be interesting to me. I've wondered how much race and power and class are at play in these conversations, and maybe sometimes named, sometimes not. And just would ask you all to reflect on that in your own communities. I've been really aware of the need for intentionality and the value of almost thinking again in an interdisciplinary way about kind of a user-centered design. Interested in what other fields, where they solved really tough problems like this, and using what kind of thinking, process mapping. What does it feel like if you're a student and you're trying to figure out what to do with your life? What is your impression of an employer? I've been thinking about that and wondering if there are folks who've tried some methods and tactics from other areas. And the piece about intentionality also is kind of our knowledge that if you are being thoughtful about you can be very thoughtful about economic development. You can do asset-based economic development, but that if you're not intentional intentional about inclusion, about equity from the start, and about local control, then it doesn't happen. It's not enough to think about what are the assets in our community, but also we need to do that in very inclusive ways. And so that's just reinforced for me the need for that type of intentionality in everything that's being done. And many of you are clearly doing that. You're very thoughtful and intentional about your work, but I think for me it's this constant reminder of always putting that at the front and saying, okay, we're recruiting workers. For whom? What do those jobs look like? What are the outcomes? That's just something I'm consistently thinking about. As you can tell, I mostly have questions for all of you. One thing I noticed was not a lot of conversation about entrepreneurship, which was notable to me. Thinking a little bit about, it sounded like there's a real interest in making sure that the businesses that are present have the employees that are needed, or maybe a lot of interest in some places in figuring out how to get the big employer to come to town. And so I end up wondering, how does that, if we're thinking about finding ways to increase wealth, to increase local control, to make sure that assets and wealth stay in a community, what role do different kinds of ownership models for businesses play? What role does entrepreneurship play? And a different kind of mindset, frankly, that is not rooted in an extractive economy of the 20th century, but really in a generative economy where people are in control of their own lives, and that wealth that's created through work stays in community and is passed from generation to the next. So that's just a challenge and something else to think through. And then the other question I have that probably many of you can answer, but I would like to know, where are the forums for conversation and for continuing this type of thinking beyond this room? What kind of support system do you have? What kind of network or peer learning groups do you have? And what do you wish you had? And I ask that in part with a real interest in thinking with you about what role the Aspen Institute plays in connecting folks, what role that other organizations, whether it's Danville Regional Foundation or other regional and large intermediaries, can play in ensuring this isn't a conversation that just happens when you have the chance to be together in a room every year or so, but that is ongoing, and maybe not just because you have the card of the person you sat next to today, but again is intentional and really built over time. So mostly I asked you a whole bunch of questions. So, but you've made me think a lot. You've made me learn a lot, and I think now there's a lot I would like to digest and think through some more as I continue to adapt and grow into the position I've taken at Aspen. I hope that I have the chance to come back to you either in writing or in person and to share more about what I learn from other communities around the country who are also taking on big, hard challenges like you are and leading the way. So thanks.
So one of the critical partners in the state of Virginia that our Virginia folks will recognize, and if you think about the revitalization of this region and really places like ours throughout the state, has been an organization called Virginia Community Capital. And I've invited Jane Henderson to come up and give her perspective really from a financial perspective. They are a critical financial partner to a lot of revitalization work that we've had throughout the state and throughout this region. And so Jane Henderson.
Thank you. I'm really humbled to be up here because I've spent the last day and a half more as a student than I have as a leader. And we do not do a lot of work in workforce development in and of itself. We're an institution that offers debt for community development projects. What I'd say is most of the work that you're talking about is funded with funding streams that don't allow you to afford debt for the programs that you run. So I sat as a student for the last couple days, but I'm a geek around money, and so some of the thoughts that were running through my head relate to that. There's a theme here about collaboration And that is one of the values at VCC. And we believe in collaboration. And we also recognize that a lot of people, when they talk about collaboration, don't realize that it is slow, it is expensive, more expensive than me having an answer and running to solution. And so it requires a new way of being together. And it requires leaders to think broader and outside their box, and also outside their funding stream, their individual funding stream. And so I just spent time watching groups, academic groups, work with economic development groups. What I tell you, in the world of community development, we started in affordable housing. We went then to small business and talked to economic development groups. And in any given community, the economic development groups didn't really know the affordable housing groups and didn't know the health groups at the community health centers. And so one of the things that we quickly learned is that we could be the convener of all of those people and try to start talking across the languages that are created by specific program and specific funders and funding streams. A lot of times when communities come together, they need to pause and check language and check values. Are we bringing, what are our agreed upon values before we even start the work we want to be about? And make sure that we're all in agreement. So as we work in collaboration, I guess the coaching I would say from hard lessons learned is when you come together, take a pause and really talk about values, talk about, give everyone permission. When I say CDBG funding, what am I talking about? Raise your hand. I don't understand that acronym. And just let people be raggedy, as we call it, for a little while until you have common language. Entrepreneurship was mentioned. I was also struck about there wasn't a lot of conversation about the role that entrepreneurship is playing in communities, both urban and rural. It's not the only answer. One of the things that we talk a lot about is using the word and, not or. We've banished the word or in our shop. When we got into entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs with capital, we got into the middle of a big debate. Should we have an incubator? Should we have an accelerator? Should we have an angel network? Should we have a venture fund? And the answer is yes. Just yes to all of it. You need an ecosystem, not one solution, because people come into advancing themselves from very different places. And so as you pick up good ideas, you don't have to have just one good idea. I would propose you need 3, 4, or 5 good ideas for your community, because people are going to arrive with different places in their life. And then I'm walking away, my to-do action is I'm very intrigued about the intercept of the urban and rural dependency. Mary and I were talking about this. You've got me going, Mary, now. I've got work to do. I'm very committed to rural areas, and yet increasingly rural areas are intercepted with urban areas or metro areas, and what can be created in synergy and yet still have independence of that local community. I really feel that people don't want to commute an hour and a half to work. And given good options, they're gonna make changes in their lives. So how do we create local options using the power of that metro churn, but create a local option that allows them to stay where they are without commuting an hour and a half? Big challenge. I got to study the data, but thank you for giving me that gift. That's going to be my work coming off of here.
Thank you much. That was awesome. I will mention one thing on entrepreneurship, and this came up at our dinner last night, and I'll just share it as it's come up a couple times, and I thought it might be of interest. One of the conversations we've had as a region, and yesterday you heard Telly Tucker present our kind of precision machining pathway. And we're very proud of that, and we've had friends from Arkansas come down and look at that career pathway. And one of the questions we've been asking ourselves is, how come when we developed this pathway, we didn't include one measure of success? How many businesses start from the students who came through that? And it's something we struggle with, and it's a question we need to continue to ask ourselves, and I think you're absolutely right to call that out for us. Finally, I want to take another point of personal privilege here, since I've got the mic and Ted's not going to come up and grab it from me, I hope. I'm going to invite a community leader to come up now, rather than a thought leader. But this one, I'm asking him to take off his community leader hat. I'm going to ask our board chair, Charlie Majors, to come up. Charlie is a recovering attorney who's the chairman of American National Bank, and he's going to come up and share his perspective really as a business leader. So as a business leader who sat in and listened to these conversations the last couple of days, what has he heard, and what do we need to be thinking about?
So let me start by thanking all of you for being here. We really appreciate your coming. We appreciate what you bring to the table, what you have brought with you, and what you've shared here. As Clark said, I'm a recovering lawyer. Now I'm a retired banker. I must tell you that as a banker, I had the chance to be on an advisory council with the Federal Reserve Board, and I made so many times I told them that I was concerned about the payment system we have here and where it might go if it got to people like Starbucks or PayPal or outside of the banking system. So they put me on this committee. And my friends started calling me the payments expert. Well, I don't know a thing about payments. And so I'm afraid to say much about workforce because you might start saying I'm the workforce expert, which I'm not. But I have really enjoyed having this opportunity to hear people who work in this area and people who think about this area come and share their ideas. I think that I've learned a lot about what's going on, some of the challenges that we have in workforce and some of the challenges that we have in education with regard to that. I've really got I've got it down to two sentences though. I think the answer is we share a lot, and we ought to share a lot. First, we share a lot because we share a lot of the challenges. We share as rural and non-urban areas. We share a lot of the problems, whether we're from Danville, Virginia, whether we're from Arkansas, whether we're from Ohio, or wherever we might be. We've got a lot of the same issues, and so it's been great to hear, not that misery loves company, but that it's been great to hear that we do share those kinds of things. And what it tells me is we need to be doing this. We need to be sharing a lot of what we're doing, the challenges we're facing, but how we are going to deal with them, how we're going to approach them, because we've got tremendous challenges, and if we do a little bit here and you do a little bit, and we get together and we continue to talk about it, then we can make a lot of progress together. I would also say that one of the things that I leave this meeting with is there's a great deal of leadership within this group. And I would encourage you, as you go back, use that leadership. Get the business community involved. I think they are very interested in this. What happens is they've got day jobs. And so you really need to get them and help lead them into the things that they need to be involved in and the things they need to be doing to make us accomplish a lot of this. And so I think if we all leave with that idea, I think it'll be a successful meeting. Again, thank you so much. I'm sorry that we did not have the beautiful weather that we usually have here, but I hope you will come back and have a chance to see some of the really nice weather. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. That was awesome. And now I'm going to ask Carl to come up and get us started with our kind of final act here.
So what? Thank all of you for staying to the end. Part of the challenge, we all go to conferences, we all go to meetings, and then we go back to our jobs and we go, what did I just do for the last 2 days? So part of what we're trying to do here, DRF has this basic, our approach to a lot of our work is we're trying to change the conversation, we're trying to change who's in the conversation, then we're trying to change behaviors, and then we're trying to change outcomes. So this is an effort to change the conversation. And it's also an effort to change who is in the conversation. As Ted said yesterday, we all tend to go to meetings where we're talking to other people who know the same code words that we do. What's your ROI on post-cumulative investments? I don't know. What is your standardized school measurement technique? I love it in Virginia. The standardized tests here are called SOL. My father was a career naval officer. SOL had a very different meaning. And the last word was luck. But we all have our code words. We all know how to talk to each other. We have a sense of what the other people mean and that kind of thing. And the reality is, if we stay in those silos, if we stay in those bubbles, this complex multi-sectoral work won't get done. We'll continue to bump along, and business people will stand up and say, well, just fix it. Well, it's a long-term, complicated process. If we knew how to just fix it, it would be fixed. And so this is difficult work in the sense that we're all struggling with our own local versions of where does prosperity come from? And how do we make the odds greater that more people in our community will experience a pathway to prosperity? It's real easy, and much of American history is about, prosperity is not really for us, it's for those people. And when we adopt that attitude, then we're surprised when people aren't supportive of what we're doing, those types of things. So I invite us all to kind of reflect on so what, and figure out, based on things you've heard here, based on new connections you have here, kind of so what, and how do we not just continue the conversation, but at the end of the day, how do we get better at the work? How do we make sure, particularly the group that I'm most concerned about are the detached young people. are living in situations where nobody's putting their arm around them and saying, you know, you could do this if you wanted to. Or demonstrating to them, well, you know, your uncle was a great skilled carpenter. You could do that, or whatever it might be. But there are these kids that are almost raising themselves. Or we are defaulting to say, let the schools raise them. And the schools can do great things, but they can't, in my opinion, they can't raise successful children by themselves. So finding a better road to prosperity for all the people in our communities, that seems to me our fundamental challenge. And workforce is a means to an end. Workforce development is a means to an end. It is not the end. The end is prosperity for more folks. So that's so what, according to Carl Stolberg. And I invite you all to participate in this conversation and come up here and use these finicky mics to help us all participate in the conversation.
So we gave the mic to a few people, now it's open. Who else wants to come up and express a few thoughts? I meant it when it was open, so anybody, welcome up, come on up, and if you want to queue up and come sit by me and the table that nobody wants to sit with me at, it would be great. You can get right up to the mic next. You're up, yes, good.
So as I said when we started this, a lot of the work that I have been doing is looking at where the intersection is between equity and inclusion and opportunity. So for me, one of the so what questions becomes, how does this get integrated into those conversations? And how does that get better integrated into these conversations? I think that in general, this work really is about how you extend opportunity to all people. But I think it also needs to be an intentional conversation. We had a conversation about some of the consulting he's doing. And he said in about half of the places where he's consulting, people really are talking about using the words equity and inclusion and thinking about how they develop what they do. In the other half, not so much so. And I'd be really interested in understanding why that is and sort of how that rolls out. Because I think, in fact, it is in general something that envelops what we all do, but in fact, to think about how we intentionally make that a larger part of that conversation, because I think in some instances the solutions that we talk about are those that really encourage that, and in fact, in some instances actually may exacerbate things in the opposite direction. And to be really aware of that and think about how we accommodate both of those is an interesting conversation. Does that help?
Yep.
Great.
So I think asking the so what question, almost by definition, moves us towards wanting something specific and tangible as a next step. And my response to Carl's question is that the so what is to remember what we've done this morning and keep applying it over and over again. And I wanted to lift up, with credit and thanks to my new friends from Wilson, the conversation this morning that began with the questions that were later identified on the slide. What if? Why not? And as we went around the table, we landed on this golfing metaphor. I'm not a golfer, but every golfer I know says you need a short game and a long game, and you can't play the game if you don't do both. And one of the things about workforce that I'm hearing today is, fortunately, a lot of our communities are seeing the results of a 10-year economic growth, and there are job shortages, workforce shortages, and we have jobs. We're still with job shortages. But some of you are having a better situation than we are, and you've got a mismatch. And so the short game is to find the low-hanging fruit that gets the people who are maybe underemployed or being overlooked for the credentials they already have in a quicker pipeline into those openings, and that's a really important short game. It's a relatively short game for the results for that 4-year pipeline that Joe brought up. So education also has a short game, although it's a much longer game to make it all happen. So, I don't know where that fits in the golf metaphor, but for me, it's somewhere short and long, right? But there's this other long game that we haven't talked as much about that I think we ought to be thinking about at a conference for the future, because it's the game that happens when we have another economic downturn. And these very people that we've been working with, and this is one of the tough questions that was coming up over breakfast, are going to be the last on, first off, potentially. And so if we talk about a gig economy, for better or for worse, there's this quality about it that is much more independently driven, and if you're a winner in that game, it could be really a great quality of life, and it has great potential for the ownership. But if you're groveling for the next contract, or sort of living that dead space that happens, or running a business that you can't see the business for, it doesn't always bode well. And I think this future question with workforce that we have to talk about is not only are we needing this battery of soft skills that round out people for kind of employment in a traditional way, but we're missing a list of attributes that ought to be added, and they have to do with running a business, personal management, how do you do budgeting if you're running your own business? And it's really kind of some core knowledge that, at least vocabulary-wise, needs to come into our workforce conversations if we're really talking about preparing a workforce for the future. And so making transitions, being comfortable with uncertainty, those are hard things to teach. It's really hard to practice. Change is not our friend, whatever anybody preaches. So I think these are the things that we have to really begin to grapple with. And I just throw those out as my so whats.
Next. Anybody else? So I'm going to offer you a couple that I heard, and a couple answers to a couple questions. One of the questions was, where do these conversations continue? And I know that, at least speaking for Linda and I, they continue through work with the Kettering Foundation of community forums. We did this last year, and equity was part of it, and the quality of jobs, and we're looking at probably doing it again next year. They're like lots of foundations, grants come along when they come along, but this idea of bringing people in a community together to have those conversations. They're a citizen democracy foundation that doesn't do anything but listen to people. That's their world. So it happens some along that way. There were questions about how do you get this aligned, or people leaning. We're big believers in the concept of collaborative capacity in communities, or if you like, the Stanford model of backbone organizations to support. We think it's necessary. We don't think communities without backbones or collaborative capacity works along the way very much. To the question of what's important, there's a quote that's some of you know the German artist Hans Hofmann. He says, "The ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary so the necessary can speak." The problem we've got in workforce is no matter how long we make the sentence, everything's necessary. So we have this hell that Greg and I live in, that more and more people want reports that are shorter and shorter. They want us to explain workforce in a half page and with 4 bullets tell them what they need to do to fix it. And it's an interesting proposition to try to tell people the world of workforce in a half page. But I'm not picking on elected officials, but some of them are in that game, but so are business leaders. And so that's a problem. So some quotes that we live by, the Satchel Paige quote that none of us are as smart as all of us. We live by. We've got to learn from each other. So it means we've got to share, and we have to have platforms for that. And sometimes those platforms work out pretty well. The intentional quote, that actually the only quote that's in my office is this Teddy Roosevelt quote, which is, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And I put a little parentheses, every day. That's all you can do. So we do that best we can. every day along the way. Joe, necessity's the mother of invention. It's an old proverb, but the reason we're coming up with new ideas is we have to. So I think that works. And then I'll offer one that's ours, and because we work in so many places where the language that all of you do when you get up here and talk would resonate perfectly with half of the places and would be like talking from Mars on the other half. So if we go to a very conservative place and we start talking about equity, I'm sorry, but it gets lost. People write us off like we don't know what we're talking about. And if we go into, if we go into Charlottesville or Chapel Hill or Chatham County where we just were, and we don't talk about it, and we're talking about return on investment, we have to tell people what ROI means because they've never heard it. And so we use the quote that we each see every issue through our own personal lenses, and then we fit what we see into a framework of our own personal beliefs. And everybody sees something different. It's the elephant bit, everybody sees something different when they look at these issues. And part of our problem is that we talk across them. So it's hard to get everybody in the room together and have this conversation, because if you're in a community that's pretty robust and mixed and people feel different things, then they can't even listen to the problem the same and hear it. So you talk about Linda and I, we talk about language all the time. What does a word mean? Remember, one of the first projects we did was on energy, and we got, I tell you I'm the last living American moderate. We get hired to look at, Greg's moderate too, we get hired to look at language on people's reports so that we can take out the inflammatory keywords that mean something completely different to half the world. And so as we talk about this more, last night a group of us were up late in the bar talking about issues that, well, we see it through this lens. So when we talk about workforce, we can't play workforce bingo. We can't just say, employers need soft skills, check, we got that one. People need better jobs, check, we've got to go deeper, one level down to the so what, Carl? All right, if you buy all of that, what do you do with it? How do you fix it? Better jobs is a good thing. Better skills is a good thing. If I ask businesses today, should you increase wages, they would say, well, it doesn't change the employee. Well, maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. Let's have that discussion. If you ask people, why do you need all that time? Well, because it takes 14 hours to get your health care fixed for your kids. Maybe that's the issue. Maybe the daycare is not open till 6. Maybe the whatever. These are harder and harder issues. So dig deeper. For equity issues, we talked about that there aren't a lot of good studies that look at equity from both sides and look at what's happened with wage change over time for occupations. Part of equity happened because some of these jobs pay way much more than they used to, and some of these jobs actually pay less, and they're still the structure of the economy. So those are hard issues that the reason we create this kind of room is we invite people to bring who you want to a meeting and let's talk about it. And y'all have been very good people about digging deep into those expressions and those thoughts. We want to keep continuing these conversations. We think it's fun and interesting and actually produces something. I'm going to open the mic back up in just a minute for any of y'all, but after this, we'll put every slide that you saw will be in the share file. Eventually, there'll be video of the entire proceedings that you could show people if you wanted to. There'll also be a highlight reel, I think, so you can just show people what type of thing. The final report that we were doing on best practices, if you have thoughts, we're going to leave it open a week. Tell us what you might want different, more or less. Then we're going to finish it out and give it to you. The report that I mentioned that Sarah just completed on attraction of brain drain and how people come, we'll send that out to you. Also in the next week or so, we'll package all this together. Clark will figure out when it all comes out to everybody. And we'll talk about the issues with y'all about, is it worth doing this type of conversation? Again, what the topic should be, how should we do it? Carl, where should we do it? I think it's open to, we've had 2 years in Danville, but I don't think anybody presumed we'd be here forever. Is there another place that y'all are that might be a great place for the future next year? We own in the end, we're going to make the most money. We own the Home of Future Thinking website title, which I think is probably just the best thing we own. Home of Future Thinking is pretty cool to have. And we'll continue to post things on there and share files on there. Greg's going to keep the best practices in workforce appendix that's part of the report as an ongoing file in the website. And so tell us new things, and we're going to make that a living document over the course of a year or so, and then we'll see how long people want us to keep it up, so that you can go there and say, hey, I'm going to steal this one, and they're by category. So how do I upskill workers? How do I deal with disadvantaged populations? How do I, whatever, and we'll do that. Those are all takeaways we wanted you to have from giving us your time the last few days. Now, going forward, I'd love to hear any thoughts that anybody has on what we should do next steps, what we should do different. The only comment we had on the wall are where the people of color. And I wish I knew, because we invite communities and y'all bring who you want to the meetings. And so I guess we have to be more intentional with that, but we're trying to be open also. So we'll focus on that more. We did get younger this year, so a couple people commented, but I think the average age in the room went down this year, which is better than we thought. I think we're predominantly women this year, which is slightly different than last year. Just a few fewer gray-haired old men, but that, we're still what we are. So we're continuing to work on that. And it may be the topic next year. If we pick a different topic, we'll get a different mix in the room. But that's what we've been trying to do. So thoughts from anybody, comments, suggestions to us going forward. Should we stop? Should we keep doing these kind of conversations? Is it worth it? What should we focus on next year? Anybody got suggestions? Come up. Please.
I had a thought after Catherine spoke about what she observed that was missing, and I feel like it's a big omission that this didn't even come up around our table until lunch, is what about immigration policy and workforce?
Yep. So I mentioned it yesterday that it's one of yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. The question was, what about immigration policy and workforce? Why didn't we spend more time on that? And I mentioned it yesterday as one of the headwinds we have, along with the demographic shifts, that if we contract the bottom line is if we contract immigration at all, then we start shrinking. That's just the way the data works. Our domestic growth is, so immigration policy matters going forward. Worth an interesting discussion. We certainly would think that would be an exciting discussion. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think a couple people mentioned yesterday that places that were welcoming and growing non-domestic growth were successful. I think that's correct. Other thoughts? And you please come take the mic to do it.
I have a question to ask y'all. I heard some people talking on the bus last night about who they wish was here as well from their community. And so maybe we can have a discussion about who else we need to bring in the future and invite in the future to make these conversations the most beneficial.
Yeah. Are there specific other people? There are a bunch of people who were invited who aren't here, so we can certainly tell you that. But yeah, but are there people specifically? Yeah.
I personally think that it's on us as leaders to invite the people we serve, because we've been great. I don't know. I mean, these kids are going to school, so I don't know if you can pull them out, but I'm pretty sure they'd come. But like a graduate from Joe's school, or like I said, somebody we're serving, maybe, I'll even pick on Wilson, maybe there's, someone that Paul is working with that we could have brought along and heard their testimony, which presumably would also answer the question about diversity and people of color and younger people. Obviously, if we're talking about workforce development, then we're talking about younger people, lower income, more brown. So I think that I've been to a lot of conferences where we've talked about that. You know, a lot of community and economic development conferences where it's like, it's great that the decision makers are at the table and it's great that the leaders are at the table, but sometimes the people that we're serving or the conversations that we're having are best answered by those that will eventually serve. And that's not on Ted and Sarah for the invite, that's on us.
Anybody else? Yes? You're going to have to project from back there or come here. As you're coming up, if there's anybody else, please come on up and queue in, please.
So one really practical thing that would help me would be certainly to get a list of the people here, but also almost by the tables that we were in and some of that. I don't know whether that was recorded, but for instance, I was on a really interesting conversation around soft skills. And I sort of know Maine was there. I mean, I know different people were there, but that would be helpful. But beyond that, also, in a very voluntary fashion, if we have these names, for us to continue to just, in a very informal way, sort of update each other on something we talked about here, you are part of, well, here's what happened. In Maine, we have a new governor. We think that's going to really bring change. For me to hear from you in 6 months, by the way, X happened in a very short way. For me, it makes me remember that because I tend to do a lot of work with foundations and funders, there are things that I might be able to send out to folks that may be of interest to them as I hear those happen. So it's not anything that's formalized, but I think conversation is really important. I think these conversations are very important, but I think continuing conversations also string them together. The other thing I'll say to you is I found in thinking about this conversation and last conversation that they were very complementary. In one way, I would say this one actually went deeper than the first one. I don't know that was intentional.
Yeah, we tried.
But also, it was a very different frame for thinking for this one. And so whether you were at both or one, they were both very rich, but they were very complementary. So thank you for that.
Now, we heard last year go deeper, and we tried to go deeper, so good. Nice to think we did. Come on up. So I hope you'll continue conversations too. We will send you everybody's name who was here. We don't know who was at your table. I'm pretty sure nobody in the room knows that, right? Okay, none of our team knows that, so we can't fix that, but we will go let you know everybody that registered and was here.
I wasn't here last year, but I heard that there were some tours in Danville to kind of see hands-on of some things that were going on. I was sort of anticipating a little bit of that, and I'd rather have 2 days that are broken up between going out and actually seeing things on the ground that are happening along with, the setting like this. So just some feedback on that.
We did do tours last year. I'm actually a little glad we didn't have yesterday afternoon planned for tours because we'd have pulled the plug on it, but we wouldn't have known that. But we just made a decision this year that not to do it because a bunch of you had been. But if we do it back in Danville again, we'll have more touring and hopefully more things to show you. So we'll make sure of that. Anybody else? Sure, ask away. That's the point of this.
First, let me say that thank you for hosting us here in Danville. It's been a real treat to be here. But I have a question. We talk a lot about youth and disconnected youth and that we need to bring them into the conversation. So I really have a question for the group that's left. Is anybody doing that well or making attempts to do it that you would like to share with the group?
Anybody know running a program? Great. All right. Nope, got an answer. Great.
Yes.
Well, we're videotaping you, so that's.
Sure. So there is a group within the Aspen Institute called the Forum for Community Solutions. And there is, in particular, they have a specific focus on opportunity youth, so ages 16 to 24, and have a group they actually call the Opportunity Youth Network. The communities that they're working with are in about 20 places around the country. For the most part, these are multi-sectoral organizations that have organized using kind of a collective impact collaborative model, not all exactly the same, but with a range of different host organizations from from chambers of commerce to local nonprofit organizations. And they're all very much focused on youth. There are right now 4 communities that are part of that network that are rural. I know there's an interest in expanding that, but regardless of whether the communities are urban or rural, this is a network that has really gone deep. They've very much empowered it's so youth-driven and youth-led with incredible community support. If you go online, there are a couple, I'm happy to send the materials so that they can be included. But if you just look for Aspen Institute, and if you look for Opportunity Youth Forum or Community Solutions, you'll likely find that. And they get together, it's a network that gets together twice a year. They've gotten together twice a year for 6 years. I had the chance to go to their conference recently. That was one of their 2 conferences. They do a site visit once a year. And I think they were in Louisiana recently. They were in Philly one year, relatively recently. And then they get together for a conference that's a little bit more like this, the other half of the year. And I was incredibly inspired and really have been spending time thinking about how do I personally learn and spend time digging into what they're doing in cities and help do some of the translation work, because what they're doing in Philly may not work exactly in Lancaster or other places. But I think there's a lot to take and learn from those groups that may be of use to you.
Anybody else? So, just Penny, did you get your answer to the map drawing yesterday?
I did not get graphical depiction of a workforce ecosystem in a region.
All right.
I'd love to see one if anyone has ever come across that coaching.
So we had this discussion yesterday. Who's actually drawn this thing?
That told me how to be a follower.
Well, so Penny is responsible for a region that includes 6 workforce boards, 7 community colleges, 9 community colleges, 17 school systems, and a bunch of other things, and she wants a 2-dimensional drawing of how the interactions on the workforce stuff works. So if anybody has a beautiful drawing of how an amazingly complex system of these things work in their community or their region, let us know, and Penny will be eternally grateful, and I will too, because we'll make sure everybody sees it. All right. Yes. Greg says there's one in a workforce report for Wisconsin that we're going to have coming out that is Milwaukee's design system that's pretty good. So we'll see. Hasn't come out yet. All right. Yeah. No. Asking me is not. Yes. Not the right thing. It's all right. Anybody else? All right. Ending shots. It's yours. And 2 things for us as we finish. First, if you need anything from us, website's econleadership.com, and everybody in the room is just Ted, Sarah, Carly at econleadership.com. Just find us that way. And just for us, thank you again for allowing us to be part of this.
Well, what I wanted to say was thanks to the head of this meeting. They're really fantastic at this time of work. We thank you all for coming. We especially thank you for staying. We understand that the road and the next meeting and all those things pull on us. We will be sharing an evaluation with you soon, and we really want your best thinking about what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and how this effort can be made more productive for you and the community or organization you should serve. So, Mr. Castillo, anything else?
With that, we're adjourned.